Ladies and gentlemen, boys and ghouls, fiends of all ages, welcome back. I'm Anarchy Ass. We are in Brookfield, Illinois tonight, and we are at the site of the Brookfield, Illinois train station. Brookfield, of course, is best known for its world-famous zoo, a zoo I've mentioned many times on this show. But that is not the reason we're here tonight. This is the Brookfield, Illinois train station. Or is it? This is not the reason I am here tonight, because what you are looking at dates from the 1980s, and it replaced the previous train station from the Victorian era that stood on this spot. But it's not gone. It has not been demolished. For if we walk out to these tracks, which originally were just 2 lines, and they were expanded to 3 in the 20th century, early 20th century. And we just walk down this stretch of platform, and we are walking east towards the city. We're about 25-30 minutes from downtown Chicago via rail. Over here, behind this massive construction project, is another building. This is what I wanted to show you. This was the original Brookfield train station that stood in the spot that we were in earlier. They moved the building. This was uprooted in the early 80s, put on rollers, and moved across the tracks to its present location. I'm going to take a look at it up close, because when they moved it, they ripped out the foundation. This is not the original foundation. Thank you.
Come on, Kelly.
You can see where the brick has been replaced. That is where the original foundation to the building was. And the same thing with these support posts. You can clearly see where the 1980s construction begins and the 1880s construction ends. There's been some alterations made to the roof too, and I'm going to get a shot of that if I step over here. You can see the late Victorian design of the roof, which has also been altered. I want to do a photo comparison from the other side. You can see the proximity to the tracks. So it's a good distance away. They didn't move at a small distance. The tracks are in the exact same spot as they were in the 1890s. But if we step over here, you can get a good look at the roof of the building and the second floor, which housed the station master's quarters. He lived here. It was his residence. He never left, at least not in the residential sense. And he could step out onto that balcony and overlook the tracks through those windows. The upper quarters contain a kitchen, a dining room, a living room, and a bedroom. So it's really a separate home up there. $18.99. $20.22. $18.99. $20.22. You can see how the details on the roof top are missing. Those are what is colorfully known as gingerbread. They're carved wood architectural ornamentation that was popular in the late Victorian era, and you can see how that's evident in this photo and not in the present day. You can also see the presence of a wind, what's the name of that? Wind compass? And you can see how this photo, which was a promo for the railroad, still bears the inscription. It's the CB&Q Railroad, which stood for Central, Burlington, and what was the Quincy Railroad. The gingerbread was on the lower roof too, the roof of the first floor. And you can see how the support beams originally stood on stone foundations, which are now gone. In fact, those posts that are there now are not original. But they were restored to somewhat of the original design. When this station was first built, Brookfield was not called Brookfield. It had the unfortunate name of Grossdale, and it was a planned community much like Riverside. After Riverside was built and after LaGrange was built, the area in between was kind of a no man's land, and developers, in fact a specific developer named Samuel Eberly Gross, created Grossdale, which sounds like a home for garbage pail kids, but it's not. This is an ad. This is from June 14th, 1889. S.E. Gross is building another new city, Grossdale, on the CB&Q Railroad, just west of adjoining Riverside. Lots are only $100. You could buy a lot. Here's what it looked like. Look at this design too, by the way. While some of it's in a grid, some of it is in a very windy, almost spaghetti bowl pattern. And that's because it was originally part of Riverside. Riverside ran out of money. There was a recession in the late 1800s, and they sold off a chunk of it to what is modern day Brookfield, what was then Grossdale. And it's now known as the Hollywood section of Brookfield, but it originally was supposed to be part of Riverside, and that's why it has that street design, which suddenly turns into a grid when they built the rest of Brookfield. And you can see that on this little map. Location and description really playing it up for the Victorian reader, because this ran in newspapers. It was a news ad. This area that the train station sits on now was the site of the original Brookfield and therefore Grossdale Town Hall. I don't have any pictures of that, I'm sorry to say. But you can tell that it was much larger than the train station, as it took up a lot more space. And this was all the personal property of this man. This is Samuel Eberly Gross, the namesake of Grossdale. And he decided to name the town after himself without real regard to the fact that it just sounds bad. Here he is sitting at his Victorian roll-top desk filled with pigeonholes and all of his office goodies. He too ran out of money and was sued multiple times, and eventually was involved in so much scandal that the town removed his name. From the name of the town. This roof was altered before they even moved it. It was not part of the moving. And if I can get around this huge tree, I want to show you another angle. This is not quite the angle I want to go for, but it's close. Here's a shot of the train station from 1954. And you can see how the roof has been taken down and so has all the gingerbread, and an additional sign has been added. But they restored the roof somewhat when they moved it. 1954, 2022. $1954, 2022. You can see the windows peeking out from the restored roof. And you can see how the second floor windows were removed too at one point. And they restored those. See the windows that were up here? Those are there in the present day, but had been boarded over and roofed over in the 50s. There was also a quaint little stairway that dropped it down from the platform. You can see a woman in the lower right-hand screen walking down that stairway. That doesn't exist. That is just filled in dirt now. In fact, they restored the back, and you can see the brickwork that's stacked there now. But in the 50s, it was a little stairway. I don't know what happened to that additional Brookfield sign that's on the side. That's long gone. This station was subjected to fire twice. It burned once in the 1800s and then again in the 20th century. And after both fires, it was restored. Fire was the major cause of destruction for Victorian architecture, which is not surprising since most of it was not built in brick and was built in a balloon frame type of method. The upper level to this station is completely wood. And it's not surprising that fire was a problem when this is what their fire department looked like. There's all 6 members, none of whom own a automobile, truck, or even had electricity. That's their pump that was drawn by horse. And I think it was volunteer. So if a fire broke out at night, you've got 7 guys asleep and no way to alert them other than to physically go to their station and tell them that there's a fire happening. And as interesting as all this station is historically significant for another reason. And I think a greater reason than its architecture or its history as a railroad station. During the World's Columbian Exposition, better known as the Chicago World's Fair, a train stopped en route, and this man got off at this train station. His face may not ring a bell with you. He is an author. This is L. Frank Baum. And if his name does not ring a bell with you, he is best remembered for writing this book. He's the author of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, sometimes just shortened to The Wizard of Oz. And of course, the book that spawned the classic film and a whole series of sequels, which he himself wrote. This is the way the first edition looked. This might not have happened if it wasn't for this building. Because when Baum stepped out, he started using his imaginative mind, and he looked out over the twisty streets. And he got a idea for a mythical place known as the Land of Oz. Now, he did go on to the Columbian Exposition and the so-called White City, the city that was built up on the Chicago lakefront, is credited as being the inspiration for the city of Oz itself. But the twisty yellow brick road that leads to it was inspired by those twisty roads that I showed you earlier, and this is what L. Frank Baum saw when he stepped out of the train. And if it wasn't for all of this massive construction that's going on, I'd show you some of those roads, because they are prevalent in the whole design of Riverside, Illinois, and in Brookfield, only in this area where L. Frank Baum happened to be. L. Frank Baum was visiting friends and family in this area. His wife was the daughter of a prominent family. They were the Gage family. And the Gages resided in this area. I don't know if Gage Road in Riverside is named after them. I would like to think that it is, and I've done some research on the subject, but it's unclear as to whether or not Gage Road is named after L. Frank Baum's family via marriage. Although they were prominent enough to where her mother, Frank Baum's mother-in-law, objected to the marriage because she thought that her daughter was marrying down by marrying L. Frank Baum. So they were that well-to-do. He, of course, hadn't written The Wizard of Oz yet, but nevertheless, it's L. Frank Baum. So that definitely would not have happened had he not visited here and stopped at this station. And there's no mention of that. When you visit this now houses the Brookfield Historical Society. There are many plaques and markers to other events in history. There's a World War II era gun over there. But there is no mention of this having any influence at all, or even being connected to The Wizard of Oz. And that is one reason why I really wanted to record this and tell this story. I first became aware of this when a resident of Riverside, a prominent educator by the name of John Gelsomino, who I was friends with, he's unfortunately passed away now, told me this incredible story. And when I researched it and verified it, I was really taken aback by it. And was amazed at how little there is about it. If you go to some sources, and I constantly criticize Wikipedia on this show, but I'll do so again. When you go to the Wizard of Oz and L. Frank Baum Wikipedia entries, there's no mention of it. There's maybe one sentence about the World's Fair in Chicago, and that's it. They really don't tell you that there was any connection to Brookfield, Illinois, Grossdale, the Grossdale train station, and L. Frank Baum. L. Frank Baum lived in Chicago when he wrote The Wizard of Oz. He then went to his own home, which is connected to this station via connection. Here's a picture of it. This is L. Frank Baum's home in Chicago. This is where he wrote The Wizard of Oz, directly after visiting this station. This is 68 Humboldt Boulevard in Chicago. Big old Victorian with classic Victorian design. Very new in Baum's time, and you can see this wonderful gaslight by my thumb. Those are prevalent throughout Riverside, but now don't exist in Chicago at all. But they did at the time of this photo, which is roughly contemporary to the time that Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz. In its first run, it had 10,000 copies, which is not huge, especially for something of that magnitude. But the publishers did not take it as seriously as he did and didn't envision it being this wild success. It went on to many, many reprints and has now been distributed all over the world. I think the second run had something like 3 million copies. I could be wrong about that. But first edition, wonderful Wizard of Oz copies, numbered only 10,000. And he wrote the entire thing in this home in Chicago, not far from this station. Inspired by the layout of Brookfield as he saw it from here. And of course, by here I mean the station when it was located on the other side. Brookfield Station itself was originally built in 1889 as Grossdale Station when Samuel Eberly Gross, a Chicago lawyer, he was a lawyer first, began selling and building lots plotted from farms and woodlands he had acquired along both sides of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad. So it was actually Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad is CB&Q. Brookfield itself was originally known as Grossdale, and the station was the first building Gross erected. So this is the very first building to ever stand here in the new subdivision. In 1981, the original station house was moved across the tracks onto the corner of Brookfield Avenue and Forest Avenue, and that is this intersection over here. You can see there's condos on it now on the other side. Even though this woman with her dog is talking on the phone in front of here and will not leave, I'm going to show you the other architectural features. For one thing, if we go up the back, there's an interesting feature. You can see there's cobblestone. They've recreated the stairway going up to the station master's quarters, and you can see how he had this back door and this wooden stairway is the only way out of his living quarters. How dangerous is that for something that caught on fire twice? This is all wood. The chimney that you see over on the right is connected to a wood-burning stove, which was the source of heat for the apartment. Kitchen being on the side. This is the back door to the station, which presumably only he had access to. And if you walked around the side, and this is the original door, by the way, we should take a look at this. Although the hardware has been changed, it's still the original design. They put this in here instead of the window, and you can see the transom transoms are rare indoors now. They open up and let heat out. This had the very high ceiling Victorian design, which they would do for temperature control, because this was in the days when there was no air conditioning. And this windowsill has the original limestone, and you can see how it's just deteriorated over the years. And again, you can see where the foundation once was and where they patched it in with newer brick. Here's a plaque commemorating Brookfield's 75th anniversary. Why it's back here, I don't know. Moving along, and again, this is where the stairway was up until the 1950s, through the 1950s. Moving back to the front of the station, there's another aspect of this that is very Victorian and that stations just don't have anymore. And that is a women's and a men's section. The men's section was accessed through this door. And this is where men would buy their tickets and then wait for trains in a segregated, separate room.
Village over in St. Charles and make sure that everything is, cut off and shut down from there.
This section overlooked the ticket window itself, and then on this section was the women's section of the station, which was also used for children. Women and children would stay on this side. The men's side was outfitted with a spittoon and allowed chewing tobacco, unlike this side. So, very peculiar and very...
I don't know that it is contingent upon that. It may or may not be. I don't know.
Victorian. And there you can see the transoms on these doors as well. And this double door on the side, presumably for bringing larger cargo and packages in. Thanks for joining me in this ghostly trip to literary history's past. I'm at a guess. Until next time. Say hi from me if you're off to see the wizard.